Hello and welcome back to the caves, everybody. Welcome back to Deep Rock Galactic, where today we're going to be taking a look at the GK2. This is Scout's Assault Rifle that Scout starts out with. We're going to be going over all the builds for it, including a vanilla build first, and then we're going to be going over each of the overclocks. So, let's begin with the GK2, and let's start out with the pros and the cons of the GK2 as a weapon. General pros of the GK2 are, it's very versatile. That's really nice. It works really well at close range, works really well at long range. It's pretty accurate, doesn't have that high recoil. If you shot an assault rifle in any other game, you're going to be pretty used to the assault rifle in this game. It's not that different. It does have pretty long range. You can pick off enemies at a distance with this pretty easily, and with the slowish rate of fire that this one has, you can just tap fire this, so even if you want to just be shooting one shot at a time at a distance, you can absolutely do that. And the DPS from it is pretty decent. The GK2 can put down most enemies fairly fast. Cons to the GK2, and just some of the cons to Scout's weapons in general. One is that they don't have the most amount of ammo. You can run through ammo with this fairly fast. Scout doesn't have tons of bullets, but that's okay since usually you're moving around quite a lot and you don't always need to be fighty, you don't always need to be holding down an area. And since it is a jack of all trades sort of weapon, it doesn't necessarily specialize in one particular area. It works fine against everything, but doesn't really excel at anything. It's okay at crowd control, it's okay at killing big targets, it's actually pretty decent at killing big targets, it's good at killing enemies at long range, it's good for killing small enemies, but it doesn't necessarily do that better than other weapons in the game. Let's go over a vanilla build for the GK2 now, and let's talk about each of its options. For this, I'm going to be using the site karl.gg. This is a fantastic website. If you would like to try it out, by all means go for it. It's a free website. There's a bunch of information on it, including build guides that are already built, so you could try them based on other users, or you could build your own guide and see what kind of stats that you have on your weapon. In Tier 1, our options are 0 base spread. This is just for the first bullet. It does get more spread as you fire. Increased rate of fire, or a quicker reload. For the vanilla GK2, I like to go with the faster reload. I find this works out quite well. It just makes it so that the reload on the GK2 is a little bit snappier, and I can get back into the fight a little bit quicker. If you want to go with the increased rate of fire, though, that one's also pretty good. The accuracy one isn't bad. It's just that I don't really find it super necessary with the GK2. The GK2 doesn't have too much spread to start out with, so it's already quite accurate. In Tier 2, our options are more damage or more ammo. I usually go with more damage here, but more ammo is also good. If you find that you're running out of ammo pretty frequently, maybe go with that one. If you want a little bit more damage and a little bit more damage per second, go with that one. In Tier 3, we have reduced spread and reduced recoil, or we have an increased magazine. The GK2 I don't find has that much recoil or spread, so I usually go with the increased magazine size here, and that takes our magazine from 30 rounds to 40 rounds. But if you like the recoil reduction, by all means take that. Tier 4, we have another two really good options with hollow points that give us increased weak spot damage, or we have hardened rounds that give us armor breaking. Usually I'll go with weak spot damage here, but if you want to go with armor breaking, that one's also quite good, especially if you plan on going to like the salt pits where there's a lot of rollers. Armor breaking can be really good against them. It can also be particularly good against big enemies like guards and Praetorians where they can tank through, and this will allow you to strip their armor off. And then in Tier 5 we have Battle Frenzy. This makes it so whenever we kill an enemy we get increased movement speed, we have improved rate of fire, and we've got stun. Usually I go with improved rate of fire here, and this makes it so the GK2 feels a lot more snappy. You can kill enemies pretty fast, do pretty good DPS. If you want to go with stun here, that one's also pretty good. Battle Frenzy is very fun and can actually be pretty decent, but it's not always the one that I go for. I actually rarely take it now on the GK2. I used to be a decent option, but then they gave us rate of fire in Tier 5, and that one's really nice. This build just makes the GK2 an even better all-around gun than it already was, and it makes it so you can kind of take whatever you'd like as a secondary. So let's go over some secondary options, where you have the boomstick, which will give you a lot more damage at close range and is very powerful. You have the Zhukov submachine guns, which will allow you to have a pretty good generalist build and give you more DPS if you'd like that. And you also have the Bolt Shark, which is more of a specialist weapon that gets you access to some special bolts, as well as it does really high damage, and it can have pretty long range. Out of these three, we're going to be taking the boomstick, at least for my vanilla build. For this is the way that I generally like running my boomstick. You can actually switch this out to kind of whatever you want. If you want more damage, you can go with damage in Tier 1, and you can go with more shockwave damage in Tier 4 if you'd like that. But for me, I'm going with extra ammo, so I can use it more often, faster reloads, just so that I can get back into the fight a little bit quicker. You don't necessarily need this if you're going to go with like Born Ready, which is a really good perk, and it's really nice on Scout, because then you can have the double barrel and just pull this out and shoot both barrels really fast if you need to. More pellets in Tier 3, so we do more damage. Blow through rounds in Tier 4, so we can potentially deal lots of damage to crowds. And then in Tier 5, fire, so that we can deal damage there. You could also go with the auto reload in Tier 5 if you wanted to go with the double barrel in Tier 2 as well. That combination works, assuming that you're not taking something like Born Ready. The general way that I use this build is use the GK2 at pretty much every range against everything, and then if there's big enemies, pull out the boomstick, do really high damage at close range. puts down enemies really well. This is actually a really solid combo that Scout starts out with. Let's go over the overclocks and talk about each of them. Our very first overclock is called gas rerouting. Gas rerouting is a clean overclock that gives you +1 rate of fire, and it gives you a faster reload speed. This was really good. This is basically you get the tier 1 of both the faster reload speed and the rate of fire. Awesome. You can build this however you would like. It's a clean overclock that does really well with any build that you want. I'm just still using my standard build for the GK2. This one works really well. It reloads really fast. You have a 1.1 second reload. That's really good. It makes it so whenever you do need to reload, it's very fast, and you can get right back into the fight. You do have a little bit faster rate of fire with this, so you're going to go through your ammo a little bit quicker, but you're going to have more DPS when you do it. For me personally, I decided to pair this with Special Powder from the Boomstick. And Special Powder makes it so that you can, well, jump around with your shotgun. So you jump off the ground, you fire the shotgun, you get flung in the opposite direction. I usually run the same type of build that I did before, although this time I take extra ammo in tier 3, because a lot of the time I'm going to be using this for bouncing around. This still works very well as a shotgun normally, where it still does very high damage, and if you're on the ground, no problem, you're not going to suffer from extra fall damage or anything. If you're jumping up in the air and still trying to use this as a weapon, especially for things above you, that might cause problems because it can fling you backwards and you might break your legs that way. Just be careful of that. This one is super fun and very useful though in a lot of situations, unless you get a very narrow cave, in which case it's not going to give you as many advantages. But I mean, even when things are swarming you, you can still jump up and fire this and you'll get flung backward, and you'll usually be in a better position, assuming you didn't throw yourself into a crowd of bugs. Our second overclock is called Compact Ammo. Compact Ammo is another clean overclock that gives us 5 more magazine size, and it reduces our recoil. This basically means that we have half of the tier 3s here, so whatever build you personally like running with the GK2, feel free to take it here. It's gonna work just fine. 5 extra ammo on the magazine does make it so you have a little bit more sustained fire, which is nice, and the recoil reduction is a little bit noticeable at long range. Again, I don't find the GK2 has that much recoil. You can run whatever build you like. I'm running my same build that I usually run with the GK2. As for a secondary, I'm just going with minimal mags on my Zukovs. I already have a very straightforward assault rifle. Now I'm going to have a very straightforward submachine gun. You can pair this with whatever you want. If you wanted more damage, you could go with something like Jumbo Shell's Boomstick or embedded detonators on the Zukovs, Trifork Volley with the crossbow. I just decided to go with something very simple. This will let me have more damage, and both these weapons work really well at pretty much every range. Zukovs aren't the best at very long range, but the GK2 is very good at that range. Zukovs are a little bit better close up. Both these weapons kind of do the same job, but that's not necessarily a bad thing to have 2 generalist weapons that can kind of do, you know, whatever you want with them. Next clean overclock is Homebrew Powder, and Homebrew Powder is a little bit of an interesting one because Homebrew Powder randomizes your damage. So you get between 80% and 140% more damage, meaning that you'll on average do 10% bonus damage with your GK2. This makes it so you can potentially low roll shots and kill things a little bit slower, but you can also potentially high roll things and kill them a little bit faster. And this one's kind of a strange overclock, and I don't really care for the Homebrew Powder options that much. For this, I did switch up the build slightly where I have increased rate of fire in tier 1. I would recommend damage in tier 2, but the rest are your choice. Pick whatever you'd like with the GK2. The damage in tier 2 just makes it so you're not low rolling on certain enemies. This one, once again, pairs well with anything, just like all the clean overclocks. For this, I decided to take bodkin points on my crossbow. This is one of my favorite overclocks, especially on the crossbow. This makes it so I have bouncy bolts, and I just go for everything on the left-hand side. This lets me have more damage. I can one-shot regular grunts, and since this bounces to 2 additional enemies, I can potentially one-shot 3 grunts no matter where I hit them. It also does very high damage if you hit slashers, like in the mouth. So, can still do decent damage there. Pheromone bolts are fantastic for just getting enemies off of you, and then I'll just use the GK2 for spraying at pretty much everything else. If you wanted more damage, something like Trifork Volley would be better than this. Moving on to the balanced overclocks, our very first one is the overclocked firing mechanism. And this one's a really fun one. This one makes it so you get increased rate of fire. This is +3 to your rate of fire, but you do get double the amount of recoil. This actually feels pretty decent on the GK2. I don't mind the extra recoil that it gets because it's not very overwhelming. The recoil also does even out over time. You can just take recoil reduction in tier 3 with the GK2 on this one, and you'll just go back to the standard recoil, but I don't find it that bad, so I don't do that. The build I run is like this, so a straight 2 build. This is More ammo, more rate of fire, armor breaking, and then just more rate of fire and a larger magazine on top of it. This one goes through ammo pretty fast, but it does shred through crowds pretty quick as well. It's actually really good for killing big things. It's pretty decent for killing all the small enemies too. It would be even better if you wanted to go with the weak spot damages if you're taking this specifically for like a dreadnought mission. For secondary for this one, I love taking double barrel on the double barrel boomstick. This is a fantastic overclock ever since I got reworked. It is really strong. This one makes it so every time that you fire your shotgun, it fires out both barrels, but it does do additional shockwave damage, so it's really good at very close range, and it's really good for crowd control. So usually I'll just be using the assault rifle at mostly medium range to just spray down enemies. Then if things get close, pull up the boomstick, give them both barrels, and you'll do a lot of damage to anything that comes in your way. I like running it like this, so I have extra shockwave damage and more ammo. Fire is also really good with this one. And this one's actually probably one of my favorite overall scout builds, because it's just, you can play so aggressive and so fast-paced. It feels like you're playing Doom, so I love that. Up next is Bolts of Mercy. This balanced overclock gives you 50% more damage whenever an enemy is affected by a status effect that you're shooting. This does reduce your magazine size, though. Status effects have been improved since the last time I talked about Bolts of Mercy, where this now includes pretty much every status effect. Before, it didn't count pheromones or neurotoxin, and I think maybe the sludge is acid. It didn't count either. Now it counts for all of those. So if things are on fire, if things are frozen, if things are being corroded, whatever it might be, you're going to be getting extra damage. Reducing your magazine size does make it so you're going to have to reload this pretty often. I would recommend the increased magazine size in Tier 3. Aside from that, I'm going with a pretty standard GK2 build here. Extra damage on it, and this one's really good for crowds. I would say Bolts of Mercy is much better for a team setting than it is for solo, although Scout does have plenty of ways of inflicting this. You could also potentially go with the stun in Tier 5 for Bolts of Mercy, because that also counts as a status effect, and that's one that you could proc directly with the GK2. I don't find that to be super necessary, because all of your grenades count as status effects of Scout, and also you have secondaries that can do all the status effects too, so that's really nice. This one pairs especially well with the crossbow as a secondary, and that's what I decided to take with mine, and for this I took fire bolts. Fire bolts are really strong, even more so with pheromone bolts, because both these count towards the effect of Bolts of Mercy, so it's really easy to proc this. It's also really strong against big enemies. Not so much dreadnoughts. If you're going to go on a dreadnought mission, you probably want to swap out fire bolts for ice bolts, but you could run the same build. One of the crowd strategies that I find really works well with this is shoot a big target with a pheromone bolt and then shoot 2 to 3 fire bolts into that target. It'll attract all the small bugs that go around it, and this will light all of them on fire. It makes it so you can get a lot of damage and a lot of value for each of your shots. It's a really strong build overall once you get the hang of it, and then you can just pour on the damage with Bolts of Mercy towards that big target once something is on fire. Up next we have Burst Fire. This is the newest overclock for the GK2, and this one's another balanced one. So this makes it so your gun is 3-round burst, which is both kind of a pro and a con, I guess, depending on how you want to see it. It can be a pro against bigger targets where you weren't going to be able to kill them with 3 shots anyway, so shooting another burst at them isn't going to matter. It's kind of a con towards very small enemies, though, where you're going to probably be wasting ammo with that. And this one also technically nerfs your rate of fire, but you do get more damage per shot, and you have a slightly larger magazine, as well as you have increased stun chance. The way I'm building mine is to increase that stun chance even further. This gets you up to 60% stun chance whenever you're hitting weak spots, which with a 3-round burst is pretty much a guarantee that you're going to stun things. You could have still not stunned the enemies, either because enemies can't be stunned, like dreadnoughts where you can't really stun them, or you could potentially low roll all of those 60% chances, so that is a possibility with this one, but it is pretty consistent at stunning most enemies. For this, I'm going to be running pretty much the same build. I'm increasing my rate of fire in Tier 1, so that way it's a little bit quicker than it otherwise would be. Increased damage in Tier 2. Increased ammo in Tier 3, so I can use this with more bursts. Recoil reduction is actually pretty good with this one too. Weak spot damage in Tier 4, since I'm going for weak spots for the stuns, and then stun in Tier 5. This one is a little bit of an awkward one, and I understand people not really liking this one. I don't find it to be all that bad, and it can be decent on certain mission types. Like, I actually like this quite a bit on Macterra Plague missions, because it's really easy to just 3-burst them in the stomach and stun them, and if you just keep moving from target to target, you'll likely have teammates that can clean these up, or Bosco can clean them up, I guess, if you're playing solo. And it works actually quite well at a distance if you can stun things like acid and web spitters. You are still lacking when things get close to you, though, so you will want a way to potentially clear off small enemies from you. For this, I decided to take the crossbow once again, and I was taking cryo bolts with this one. I'm running the exact same way that I run fire bolts. This will just allow me to put a pheromone bolt into something big and then shoot the cryo bolts into it. This will freeze everything around it, and then I can just burst fire them to death. Or alternatively, if things are getting close to me and I don't have time for that, I can always stick cryo bolts in the ground and then just keep backing up while enemies walk across that, and they'll likely be frozen. So I can kind of keep up with the burst fire. Next overclock is AI Stability Engine. This is an unstable overclock that gives you no recoil and basically no spread with the GK2. There is still some spread buildup, but it's not that much. As well as you get 50% more damage when hitting weak spots, which is pretty strong. You do lose out on rate of fire from this, and you do lose out on direct damage. Luckily, ever since the GK2 got changed, this overclock got immensely better. It's really strong. This pretty much means that you have a laser rifle that you can just point at anything, and so long as you can aim accurately at that enemy, you can hit it. The way I like to build it is like this, so increased rate of fire, more damage, larger magazine, more weak spot damage, and more rate of fire. If you take both the rate of fires, you go up to a little bit faster rate of fire than what the GK2 has base, and if you go with the damage in tier 2, you go up slightly more damage than what you're losing. That's pretty nice. And this one, you're just going to be going for weak spots. It's really good for picking off enemies. It can potentially struggle if enemies really start rushing you because it doesn't shoot super fast, so it might not kill super quick. It still can if you're hitting those weak spots. So pairing it with a secondary that can clear off the small enemies can actually be really good. There's actually a lot of different options you can take with this one. I'm going to be taking jumbo shells with my boomstick for this. Jumbo shells just gets me more damage per pellet. It does reduce my overall ammo, and it does increase the reload time. That's not such a big deal for this one though, because I'm just going to be using this at close range to pick off big targets or if there's a lot of small things coming. Alternatively, you could also go with double barrel for this. That's really good for clearing off things once they get up close or stunning things when they get up close. Gas recycling is also really good for the Zukovs for that reason too. I actually really like that combo. And then our very last overclock for the GK2 is electrifying reload. This makes it so whenever you hit an enemy with your bullets, it'll stick into them, at least if you hit a weak spot. If you hit armor, this doesn't really count. But if you're hitting weak spots, then it'll stick into the enemy, and when you go to reload, this will cause it to zap that enemy and deal damage over time. One bullet from this is actually enough to kill a grunt on any difficulty, besides Has 5+, I think, if you scale up their health. But even on regular Has 5, you can kill them no problem with this, which can be pretty good, and it sounds like you could clear up an entire crowd really easily with this. You kind of can, but you do have to be more spacing your shots out. And it's never going to be super consistent either, just because you can't really guarantee that you're going to be shooting each and every enemy and getting the most value per reload. Luckily, every time that you shoot the same enemy, this will build up and deal more damage when they actually trigger. So that's pretty good. It doesn't scale the same way. It's just on the initial release, or it's just on the initial reload that'll deal extra damage. Not that it will just build up a whole bunch of extra damage and deal more damage over time. The damage over time is set, so it's kind of capped at where it can be. Downside to this overclock is that we lose out on ammo, we lose out on mag size. Not such a big deal. With this one, I am running my GK2 a little bit differently. So in tier 1, I'm going with a faster reload speed. This would just helps so that I can reload this more often and just zap more enemies. Tier 2, I would recommend more ammo for this one because a lot of your damage is going to be coming from the electricity, and you just want to have more ammo then. You could go with more damage here. That's not going to be a bad option at all. Larger mag size in tier 3, so we go back up to the normal mag size of the GK2. 20 rounds, I just don't find to be enough with this. Increased weak spot damage in tier 4, but you could go with armor breaking if you'd like. And then increased rate of fire in tier 5, but all of them in tier 5 are pretty good with this one. Since you can trigger Battle Frenzy multiple times with just one reload, that's kind of nice just to have extra movement speed. Increased rate of fire will just make it so your gun kills a little bit quicker, and then the stun can also be pretty useful because if things are stunned and being electrocuted, they're not that big of a deal. As for a secondary, you can also pair this with whatever you'd like. The GK2 is very flexible, even in its unstable overclocks. I personally like going with gas recycling on the Zukovs. This one's quite strong. It's really good at very close range, and it's also really good when enemies are being electrocuted because I do like taking the conductive bullets in tier 5. That'll make it so we do even more damage with the Zukovs, as well as just with gas recycling alone on the Zukovs, we can rip through armor of enemies, so that's really nice. And that'll do it for all of the builds for the GK2. This weapon is very versatile. It works really well with just about everything. Tell me your thoughts on the GK2 and its overclocks, especially burst fire. How are you guys enjoying that one? Thank you guys so very much for watching this. I hope that you guys enjoyed it, and tell me what weapon you'd like to see next. We are going to be going through all the primary weapons since they did get the new overclocks. Thank you guys so very much for watching this. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye-bye, everyone.